Does Michael Brandsegg-Nygård just make too much sense for the Sharks to draft with the Pittsburgh Penguins pick?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, contributor at San Jose Hockey Now, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Probably part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. And if you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. And today, our Bald King, Tony Ferrari from the Hockey News, joins for another draft profile. This time, one Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, where we discuss the defensive forward and why he is like the perfect glue guy for what these Sharks are building, and why there's still offensive pop to be found with him. So, plus, also get some of Tony's round 2 targets, since the Sharks do have two early round 2 picks. So before we get into all of that, do want to let you guys know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with guaranteed. That's $150 bucks, win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And now we bring in our Bald King himself, Tony Ferrari. How's it going, buddy?
Not too bad. Aside from the fact that right when I came on here, I turned off the Leafs game, and you decided to tell me that, as the Leafs always do, they blew it in late in the game and probably going to lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who I know you're at a point where you're fine if they start losing again.
Yes, we got the Penguins out of the top or the bottom 10, top 10, whatever way you're looking at the standings. Now they need to kind of get a little bit closer to the top 10. So hopefully, as we're recording this, Austin Matthews can get towards his goal of 69 goals, because I think that's what we all want to see, is Austin Matthews hit 69 goals. No more, no less. So we're going to be talking about somebody who probably won't score 69 goals in an NHL season, but that would be amazing if he did. So we're going to be talking about one Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. So he is a forward playing in the HockeyAllsvenskan, 6'1", 198 pounds. In 41 games, he has 8 goals, 10 assists with 75 shots on goals. So Tony, as I ask everybody, what makes MBN such an intriguing prospect?
I think the big thing that makes him such an intriguing prospect is you don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to get a very good NHLer. He plays a really smart, really well-rounded game. His defensive game is mature already. He plays physically along the boards. He can work the cycle just about as well as anybody in this draft class. And he's got some offensive tools that have been improving throughout the season, especially at the pro level. We see him in the qualification rounds for the Allsvenskan as basically their playoffs to get to the SHL. He's been dominant. He's got 9 points in 10 games in the process. And even though his team's down 3-1 in the series that they're currently in, he's been fantastic. I think he has 5 points in the 4 games. So it's not like he's not pulling his weight. He's doing a lot of really good things offensively, and that just adds to that defensive profile that he already brings us as a really high-end two-way forward.
All right, so, I mean, I'm very much defenses for nerds. Why is he like considered a potential top 10, top 15 pick? Is it just because like the floor is so high with him that maybe the ceiling isn't as high as others, but you're getting a NHL player, like he's going to be an NHL player and probably have a very long career in the NHL, right?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that teams are figuring out whether they want to take him to the top 10 or if he does fall into that 10 to 15 range. He's a really interesting player in the fact that he is developing offensively a lot faster than what we've seen, than what we expected him. I compare him a little bit to Marco Kasper in that way, because we saw Marco Kasper put on this great show defensively. He showed how well-rounded his game was a couple years ago in the draft. And then the following season in the SHL, he really started to pop off offensively before coming to the AHL. Michael Brandsegg-Nygård's offensive pop is starting in his draft year, which is what I really like about him. the other thing is, in this draft, it's not as deep, it's not as strong as a lot of drafts in recent years. So a guy like this is a little bit more attractive, a little higher up. So I think with the combination of the fact that he does bring so much to the game outside of his offensive game that is still developing and still becoming a really good tool, he's going to be that kind of surefire guy. So if a team's worried about, is this player X going to pan out, they're not worried about it with MBN because he's going to be there. And I know defense is for nerds. I'm very much in that camp. But when you have a guy like Will Smith, who will probably be a center on your team, it doesn't hurt to have a guy like MBN on the wing, cleaning up some of the mistakes that he might make in his own end.
That's a very good point there. So we talk about his defense, right? What other, and you talk about kind of the offense is starting to pop. What about his offense do you think is kind of the intriguing? What do you think is going to continue to grow and make him, worthy of a top 10, top 15 pick?
One of the things I really like about MBN's offensive game is that he isn't reliant on being a pure shooter. He's got a really good shot, but he isn't relying on it. He's learned to distribute the puck a little bit more, and he makes passes that you're not expecting a guy like him to make. He's not a fancy dangler. You have Will Smith in the system to do that, and he'll make the kind of play that we'll see, I'm sure, in the Frozen Four, where he dangles through two guys, makes a pass through a couple guys' legs, and you're like, wow, how did he do that? MBN's making all of the simple passes, all of the smart passes, and every once in a while he'll pull out that pass that you're like, oh, like I didn't know you had that in his arsenal. There's a pass earlier in the qualification rounds where he kind of spun off a defender in front of the net after getting the puck and then just fed it back door. And little things like that where he's learning to bring a little bit more dynamism into his game, and that's where I really like it, because he's never going to be the high-end, flashy, highlight reel every single night kind of guy. But if he can develop a little bit of that, bring some of that skill into his game, I think that's where you're going to find a lot of offensive value. We saw him at the World Juniors. He was a force there. He really was generating a ton of offense. Whenever he was on the ice, that's when his team was up. That's when his team was getting scoring chances. Whenever he wasn't on the ice, they got filled in a little bit. But that's kind of what you're talking about with him. He really controls the pace of play. He really controls the game in that regard. So I think that offensive game is coming along. There's that dynamic element developing, even if it never reaches the heights of the high-end guys. Yeah, but you don't need it to, because he'll be playing with those high-end guys, cleaning up their mistakes, and really kind of connecting and finishing plays for them.
So he sounds like GM catnip of like, or a coach. Like, this is the type of player that you're never gonna have to worry about his ice time, because he's going to do all the little things right. And like a Kent Johnson, for example, where you do all the crazy stuff and it looks great, but then like if you can't, win a board battle, you make dumb mistakes, whatever, then that you see your ice time kind of decrease. Sounds like with MBN, he's going to be one of those guys who's probably going to play like 18 to 20 minutes a night because coaches love him. All situations type of player where, probably going to be an ace penalty kill type of player, do whatever you need for him. And that sounds like a coach and GM catnip, right?
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing too is with the Sharks specifically is we joked about that Pittsburgh pick earlier, but Michael Brandsegg-Nygård may be available at that pick. He's a guy that, like I said, as the year's gone on, I think people are becoming a little bit more infatuated with some of the guys that are a little bit more boom and bust. As Caden Lindstrom's and guys like that move up the board, a guy like MBN kind of falls down a little bit. So if Pittsburgh's pick ends up being 13 or 14, like we all kind of hope, maybe that's where you can get MBN. And to pair him with a Celebrini, that'd be a pretty sweet draft class.
That's a pretty good start right there. You feel pretty good walking away with those two guys there. So what is, as he continues his development, what do you think is going to be the one thing that he really needs to work on going through his process?
I would love to see him get a little bit quicker, a little bit more agile in small areas.
Go Leafs. They won in overtime.
Spoiler. The Leafs won in overtime. What is happening?
Yes. Sorry.
But it's okay. But with MBN, I think the big thing is I'd like to see him get a little quicker in small areas. And I referenced that one assist where he rolled off a defender in front of the net and made the pass backdoor. Those little things like that. I'd like to see him continue developing that aspect of his game. And at the end of the day, that may be in there still because we're seeing him play at the men's level. So a lot of time with these guys, when they go to the men's level, they simplify. They take some of the flashiness. They take some of the risk out of their game. And maybe NBN's doing that. So I would love to see him play, as we did at the World Juniors, against a little bit more of his age competition, just to see if it's in there. But I think it is. I think he's got some more offense to give. And again, like I said, I just want to see him bring more of that offense, bring more of that dynamism, and then get a little bit quicker in those small areas.
All right, guys, before we continue with Tony, where we talk about kind of the timeline and development for NBN, where he would kind of fit in the Sharks prospect pool, and why it just makes a lot of sense for the Sharks to draft him, just to take a quick break. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and MLB is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, on app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? If you want to keep betting on Steph Curry to do cool Steph Curry things, because that's what I like to do, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right. So interesting with him being a potential first round pick, right? With his timeline, especially with SHL kind of, I know he plays at HockeyAllsvenskan, but like that agreement of, if you're first round pick, you can kind of come over anytime you want. So when do you think is a realistic timeline of seeing him play in the AHL and then eventually in the NHL?
If I'm NBN, I probably play one more season overseas. His contract's done at the end of the season, so maybe he ends up signing with an SHL team if his team doesn't get there, which it doesn't look like they will, and plays a season in the SHL, really shows he can prove and play his game there, and then come over to the AHL, split the season, and AHL, NHL. But I especially with the Sharks, I don't think you're rushing anything. So he's a guy that I think you can let him take that extra year in Sweden, let him take that extra year overseas, come to the AHL, let him acclimate to the pace of play here in North America on the smaller ice, and then slowly work him into the lineup. Like I said, the Sharks aren't rushing anything right now, and NBN should fit right in on that timeline.
Of course, the Sharks have a couple of first-round Swedes that they've drafted and or traded for. You have Filip, who made his AHL debut, last week. You have David Edstrom, who's still playing in the SHL playoffs. How does NBN kind of compare to these guys? I know Bystedt's a little bit bigger of a guy, 6'4", plays center, and Edstrom, I think, who's a end of the first round pick last year. I mean, granted, those guys are both end of the first round picks in the draft year. NBN probably a little bit more pedigree, I would assume, being a potential top 15 pick. Where do you kind of slot these players? How do you kind of compare all three of them?
I think NBN's a better version of David Edstrom. I think David Edstrom is a two-way guy, relies on his defensive game, and you hope that offensive game comes. I think we've seen his offensive game come a little bit more with with NBN at this point. And I would slot him ahead of both of those guys at this point, even though Filip Bystedt has blown up and he's had a fantastic couple seasons since being drafted. I think NBN gets slotted right ahead of those guys, behind Will Smith, certainly, and probably whoever goes at first or second overall, probably Macklin Celebrini, hopefully for the Sharks' sake. But he's right in that range of the next group. I think he probably isn't that A tier of prospect. He's that B plus. So he's probably heading up to the second tier of prospects.
Musty, I would assume you have, just because of his dynamic offense, and he's a ridiculous force.
Yeah, I think Musty's probably at the tail end of that Will Smith tier. I think Celebrini, if that's the guy at first overall this year, or whoever you drafted at the top of this end of this year's draft, probably gets the tier of their own. Then you get Smith and Musty, and then you get a guy like NBN and the next set of guys.
For the Sharks, as they kind of, of course, we're always getting excited about like guys like Musty and Smith and stuff like that. But a guy like NBN is one of those, again, you and I both defenses for nerd. But these are the type of guys you need to like be good and like go far in the playoffs, right? So if things work out and the Sharks do get a guy like Celebrini, you have Will Smith last year, you have Quentin Musty. Picking a guy like NBN, who maybe his upside isn't as high, but this like super high floor who can help cover for, like you said, kind of cover for some of the Sharks, offensive dynamic players like a Will Smith. Like it makes a lot of sense, right? To as you try to, as Wu-Tang Clan said, you have to diversify your bonds, right? You have to you can't just pick all super high dynamic offensive players as much as fun as it is. You have to make sure like everybody, all the pieces fit. So you think the Sharks should look really hard at a guy like him, like MBN?
I do. I think you pick a guy like MBN, you envision him on the right wing with Will Smith down the middle and Quentin Musty on the left side. And you've got a really interesting trio of guys. You have some power, some skill, some playmaking, some finesse. The guy that's going to be responsible in the back end in MBN. And all three of them, I think, could keep up with each other offensively. So I think that would be a really interesting trio. Or you pair him up with, I keep saying Celebrini, but you pair him up on your top line with William Eklund up there as well. There's a lot of kind of combinations. And MBN really is that guy that completes a line. He's the kind of guy that takes a very good line and makes it a great line, even though he's not necessarily going to be a truly great player himself.
So what if he peaks offensively? Like what type of player or could the Sharks or whoever drafts him be getting? Like what are you kind of looking at as his top tier ceiling?
It's really interesting with MBN because that's a hard question just based on, does he end up playing on the third line of a really high end team? Does he end up playing on the second line? Does he end up getting wedged into first line minutes because they need that defensive responsibility guy? So could he be a 65-point, 70-point guy? I think he could with the right circumstances. But I think the realistic, more reasonable thing is a 55, 60-point guy, plays really good defensively, and just meshes well with whatever kind of line mates you need him to play with.
Like potential like Selke good defensively?
I don't know if Selke good defensively, just because that's such a hard thing to project. You see a good defensive player at the junior level or in the draft process, and you're like, is that Patrice Bergeron? Is that a guy that wins Selkies? Maybe not, but defense comes with maturity at the same time. So we see good defensive habits, but we need to see that develop even further, because if he stays where he is, he's a very good defensive player. If he continues developing, then he becomes a great defensive player, and then you start talking about whether he's in the Selke conversation.
All right, so you think one more year, probably in either HockeyAllsvenskan or the SHL, probably a year or two in the AHL, maybe a year and a half. Well, we know, especially with the Sharks, the way they're playing. And then you pair that with like potential Bystedt, Edstrom, like you're starting to kind of see a foundation of like, yes, we have cool offensive guys like Musty and Smith, but then we can also, again, like you can't just be all gas, no brakes when you want to play championship style hockey. And that's the goal, right? Sustainable winning hockey is the goal here. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, for the Sharks if they don't want to go defense here, if they want to just kind of pick best player available or continue to kind of grow this forward group. A guy like MBN makes a ton of sense, right?
Yeah, I think he makes a ton of sense because, like I said, whichever guy you want to pair him with down the middle, whether it is a Will Smith or whether it is you get him up on the top line with William Eklund, or you put him on that third line with Bystedt and Edstrom, then you have a dominant third line. Like there's so many possibilities with the way this kid could fit in the lineup, that, like you said, you're starting to see the foundation of a truly competitive top nine. Where he fits, that'll be up to him in the coaching staff and everything. But I think MBN is a guy that would fit really well in the Sharks system, and I think solves a lot of the issues of people who are concerned about some of these highly skilled guys that don't have defensive games, Will Smith and Quentin Musty.
Again. All right, guys, before we continue with Tony, where we kind of start peeking at the second round and which guys he likes there, I asked him about a couple guys who I think could be potential Sharks fits for them, and if there's a goalie we're taking in the second round. So we'll get to that here in just 1 minute. We're past the halfway point, almost to the end of the season. I know it's been a tough one, Sharks fans, but regardless of their current standings, I want to remind you that you could still win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleepers are our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick some of your favorite players, whether they're NHL superstars like McDavid, Ovechkin, or Crosby, or pick some of your favorite Sharks players like Granlund, Zetterlund, or Eklund. Record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Sharks fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. You don't have to play defense if you're playing the entire time in the offensive zone. That's go score a bunch of goals. So I wanted to also talk about, the Sharks have 2 very high second round picks here, right? They're going to have their own pick, which is probably going to be 33 or 34. And then you have this Devils pick, which is looking right now to be, 40, 41, 42. So I wanted to kind of start getting into some of the late first round, kind of second round targets, guys that you're kind of looking at, guys that you really like that could be in the range. So I'm going to go here, assuming the Sharks potentially draft Celebrini. We'll see what they do with that Pittsburgh pick. But where are you kind of going if you're Mike Greer? You both are bald and beautiful. Where are you going with pick 34, pick 42?
Now, as a man who looks exactly like Mike Greer, I think you love the fact that Michael Brandsegg-Nygård's at that Pittsburgh pick, so you take him there, and then you find your defenseman at the top of the second round. And I think a guy like Alphonse Frey, who I know some people have him very high up on their boards.
Will
personally. Yeah, that's exactly who I'm referencing. Will Scouch has him very high up on his board. And while I don't have him quite as high, he is in my top 2 or 3 defensemen in this draft class. I think Alphonse Frey is absolutely fantastic. And he's a guy that I think is going to fall out of the first round or be right there at the end. So I think Alphonse Frey, who is this incredible puck mover, underrated defensive game. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for the ability to kind of just skate and take the puck away. Like, you don't need to be this big brooding defender. If you have the ability to kind of skate up to a guy, just simply strip the puck from him and then move the puck up ice. So I think he's a really interesting player in that range. If you want to go a little bit more traditional on that pure defenseman kind of range, a Danilo Stinkov would be a really fun player, a Dominic Bedinka, who are both going to be in that second, third round range. And I think those guys would be really interesting picks. Both play a little bit more of a reserve game, but they show capabilities as a breakout passer that you're not worried about them touching the puck, which is the case with a lot of these defense only guys. So I think they play that modern defensive defenseman game. So it's going to be really interesting to see if those guys go there. And then if you want to move away from defensemen, I think you got guys like Andrew Basha. Maybe he falls. I know there are teams that are a little bit low on him just because he is a little small, a little reliant on high skill, but he's putting up a ton of points. He puts up some incredible playmaking plays on the videos. He does so many things that you want to see from a playmaker, from a guy that plays with such a high pace, plays with so much speed. He really is a fun, entertaining player to watch. I know in discussions with Will and other people, we've tried to find a comparable for him. And while this is going to sound like a very Homer-ish comparable and a very high-end comp, but a William Nylander stylistically, not the same level of player as William Nylander. I think William Nylander's proven that he's in the upper echelon of players.
Nylander? That's my question right now, because the one in Columbus is
no. Alex Nylander is much more of a stand and shoot kind of boy. He is putting up numbers in Columbus at this point. So, but no, that high octane, willing to kind of spin, turn back, walk into the middle of the ice, hold on to the puck that extra second or extra 3 or 4 seconds sometimes to make the play. So I think that's kind of stylistically a comparable, at least a little bit. Like I said, doesn't reach the same offensive heights, but he could be there. Does a guy like Igor Chernyshov fall? A Russian kid who is really, really sound, plays a smart two-way game, is a little bit like MBN light, maybe a little bit kind of similar player. is he a guy that falls? And then there's a few other forwards that could be in that range. John Mustard, who plays up and down the ice, just tries to go north and south at all times. Really good shooter. Sometimes doesn't remember he has teammates, but who needs to when you're able to walk in and snipe it like he can sometimes. And then a Teddy Stiga. I think Teddy Stiga is one of the most underrated players in this draft class. Fantastic motor. Really complements whichever line he's playing on, whether he's playing with James Hagens at that UNCWP or he's playing with Cole Eiserman or whoever he's playing with. Even if he's away from those guys, playing with a guy like Kamil Bednarik, he's able to kind of work harder than anyone on the ice, play at a high pace, make intelligent passes. And I know some people will kind of jump on him for his size, but he doesn't play small. So I think that's a guy that could be really interesting in there as well. And then I think the wild card out of all of it is Aron Kiviharu, the Finnish defenseman who was once regarded as a top 2 or 3 guy in this draft class as recently as last season. Fallen completely off the earth a little bit. His play hasn't quite lived up to where people expected it to. And then he got hurt and he's been out all year basically. So was he dealing with that injury early in the season? Was that kind of impeding his ability to kind of do what we've seen him do? He's a smaller defenseman. He relies on his passing a lot. He's not the most fleet of foot, but he's agile. He moves well. He's just not quick and fast. So I think he's a really interesting player. If he falls to that second round, you jump on him just because that's a lot of potential. And if that injury was hampering him, then you go, maybe we got found money. Maybe if you end up with a Celebrini, a Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, and Aron Kiviharu, you have 3 top 15 picks at the end of the day. So he'd be a really interesting guy at the start of the second round as well.
A couple guys who are kind of potentially in that range I wanted to ask you about quickly. Cole Hudson, the left-handed defenseman, is he BU guy? Going to be a BU? We know, of course, the Sharks ties with BU. A little bit smaller guy, right? 5'10", but is he a potential guy to look at as a very end of the late first, beginning of the second round guy?
Maybe. I think with Mike Grier's track record, I don't think he looks there just because he doesn't tend to love the undersized guys. And I think
unless the value there, like Luca Cagnoni, who's
exactly, unless
a second round pick, and you got him in the 4th round, and now everyone looks like idiots for not drafting Luca Cagnoni.
Exactly, right? Like that's the kind of smaller guy I think Mike Grier targets. With Cole Hudson, I think he knows who his brother is in Lane Hudson. He tries to play like his brother, and he's just not quite his brother. So I think when you have that play style where it's already a risky play style, I think there, as much as people don't want to admit it, there are reasons Lane Hudson fell to the second round. There are reasons he wasn't a Hobey Baker finalist this year or last year. Whether that's justified or not, because I think he was absolutely fantastic this year. But when you're projecting to the NHL, it's a little bit different than projecting to college. So I think there are still some defensive concerns, some concerns in his own end, and concerns about just handling the forcefulness and the strength of NHL players. And I think Cole Hudson deals with all of those things and probably a little bit more because he's not quite at the level his brother was at this age. So I think he'll be a guy that I think will be available in that range.
Yep. I
think he could even get taken in that range. And I think sometimes teams take guys because of their names.
I mean, bloodlines, of course. So I understand. And another guy I want to ask, EJ Emery, who I think, 6'3", right-handed defenseman going to North Dakota. That kind of sounds like a Mike Grier type of guy, big guy going the college route. Is he a potential guy to look at here at the beginning of the second round?
While I don't have him quite that high, that's definitely a Sharks guy. That's a guy that plays that safe defensive game. He's got the physical tools. I think that's the biggest thing that there is there. He's kind of that raw ball of clay where you're like, okay, what can we make you? And at the end of the day, I think he's just going to be a really solid number 4, 5, 6 defenseman. Optimistically when I say 4 or 5, but he plays a defensive game. He'll hit guys. He'll play in his own zone. He'll block shots. Sometimes there's issues with the puck on his stick. So I think with EJ Emery, I look at him and I go, just draft Dominic Bedenka or just draft Danilo Stinkov. You'll get a similar-ish player, at least in terms of results defensively. Mm-hmm. and you don't have to worry about them moving the puck as much.
All right, and then last question before we get to our final questions here. Goalies, the Sharks still looking for a goalie. Question mark?
That's kind of the best way to do it. I think this year's goalie class is not great, but there's a couple names that I will say that could be second round guys. I think I have at least one of them in my second round. Ryerson Leanders from the Mississauga Steelheads been fantastic this year in the OHL. Really, really good goalie. Played, I think it was 36 games, which is one of the top 5 ever as a D-1 goalie, a 16-year-old goalie. And then this year, he's just continued playing even better. He's been fantastic for that Steelheads team, who is a bit more of a run and gun offensive team, and they've relied on their goalies to do a lot of work back there. They have 2 highly touted goalies. Jack Ivankovic is a top 10 OHL draft pick from last year, and he's been fantastic too. So that team has really relied on those 2 goalies, and I think Ryerson Leanders deserves to be a second-round pick. And the other one's Carter George, Owen Sound Tack goalie. They just got eliminated from the OHL playoffs, and he'll probably be the starter at the Ivan Holinka for Team Canada. He's been really, really good behind a team that has been really, really inconsistent. I think you look at that Owen Sound team and you're like, where is that massive season from Colby Barlow and some of these other guys? And it didn't quite happen this year. I know injuries played a role, but that team was super, super inconsistent. And Carter George really was the one consistent factor for that team. So I think he's another one. With that said, both goalies are 6 foot. So I don't know. Like teams don't love it. So it's one of those things where these are probably the 2 best goalies in the draft, but they're both small, so they may end up not getting drafted till 3rd round. Is that when we see goalies start to go? It's going to be really interesting in the crease in this draft.
All right, we'll get you out here the last 2 questions. So last time I asked you which player you thought was going to be the best player in 5 years from now, I assume you said Demidov because everyone kind of goes that way. Non-celebrity pick. We'll just go with that. Which guy who's kind of projected as a top 10 guy are you a little queasy about?
Cole Yzerman. Okay. I think that's kind of a popularish answer, but it's been my answer all year. I was one of the early people that were on the fact that like there's some worry about Cole Yzerman just because as good as his shot is, there's a lot to fill out in his game. I think he still has the capabilities in the right situation of being a really high-end goal scorer at the NHL level, a guy that can put up 40 goals, maybe even. But we talked about Michael Brandsegg-Nygård can kind of play with anybody in the NHL when he gets there. Play whatever role you need him to play. He's going to bring some of that defensive presence. Cole Yzerman very much needs to play in a specific situation. He needs to play where other guys are going to do some of the work for him. Other guys are going to set him up, and he's allowed to kind of be what Cole Yzerman is. And I think there are players in the NHL that certainly play that role and play that role to a high level. So am I saying he's going to be a terrible player? Certainly not. He's a guy that's in my top 15. I don't think any of those guys are going to be terrible players. So I'm lower than him on consensus, but I still think there's a lot there.
And we also have Casper Holtner at home. It's like basically kind of the same thing. So, all right, where in the draft does MBN go? What pick?
I think MBN goes 14th.
Congrats, Caps right now. They have the 14th pick right now. So as of Tankathon update. So, but yeah, I can see the Sharks right there. This makes a lot of sense for the Sharks. So to be in on a guy like MBN. So Tony, thank you so much. Where can the people find you? What do you got coming out next?
You can find all my work at the Hockey News, except for my Game Tape with Tony videos. They're at Elite Prospects YouTube page. So check all that out. I'll have U18 stuff coming, and I have another draft ranking coming next Monday, the 15th of April. So check that out.
Taxed, you pay your taxes, you get a nice draft ranking from Tony. So I assume I barely missed the cut this time again, right?
yeah, definitely.
Thanks. The 20 times overager. Tony, thanks so much, buddy. We'll catch you again soon.
Sounds good, bud.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tony. Thank you again for making Locked On Sharks your first listen of the day. Of course, you can follow along wherever you get podcasts or you can watch on YouTube as well, or do both. So make sure if you haven't subscribed, do so, because we're going to continue to ramp up the draft coverage as we get closer to the draft, especially with the Sharks having 4 top 50 picks, potentially 4 top 50 picks. Plenty of great draft coverage coming here at Locked On Sharks. You can also follow along on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. You can follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole. Until tomorrow, bye, friends.